So we'll start with the sign code update.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Laura Turway, I'm a planner with the Planning Division, and I'm here to talk to you about our recent process to update our sign code. As you know, the city has regulations for signage on private property and public property as well. How many signs you can have on your property, how big those signs can be. The graphic on the screen behind me is an example of what our current standards are. So our current standards hadn't been really significantly updated in more than 20 years. So it was one of our city commission goals to take a look at our sign codes and see if they were appropriate. More specifically, we wanted to look at signage standards which are safe, clear, fair, and supported by the community. Our major focus was to make sure that we talked to as many people as we could, and we had support from everyone in the community for our sign standards. Another piece of this is that we're just, again, looking at materials and types and placements of signs. We're not looking at what the text of the sign is or what signs actually say. We're just sort of putting boxes around how big they are and where they're located. We had quite a project team working on this task. We had the Oregon City Planning Division, and we hired a consultant, Enviro Issues, and they had a sub-consultant, Herbsworks, working on the project as well. I'll talk about it in a few minutes, but we put together a community advisory team, or a CAT, and then we also had many contacts with people in our community as well. We started our community engagement on this project right after 4th of July. And we went to 17 briefings in those summer months. We talked to everyone from every neighborhood association we can get ourselves on the agenda to, as well as the Oregon City Main Street and Chamber of Commerce. Anyone we could think of that would listen to us, we talked to them. We wanted to know what people liked or disliked about sign code standards. We know that sign code standards can help shape a community. You can think of Las Vegas, and it leads to their identity a little bit. You can also think of places like Sisters, where some of the signs are a little bit more integrated, or Leavenworth, Washington. We put together a project website, and it's been up throughout this entire project. It's still up today, and one of our goals was to put everything that we produce on the project website so that the community could have buy-in and comment on it, and it would be a very transparent process. So our project purpose, background, some surveys, were all included in that. We also had a sign up for email updates. We advertised on Trail News. Anywhere and everywhere we could think of to advertise our process, we did. We emailed every church around town, you name it. So we put together this community advisory team. When we went to meet with all the 17 groups, we were recruiting for membership for our community advisory team. We had a series of 11 positions, and people applied for those positions, and they were appointed by the mayor. We were rather lucky in that we had 11 people appropriately within each designation apply, and so they were all accepted to the CAT team. Zach was your planning commission member, or Commissioner Henkin on the sign team as well. You can notice the members on here, and it's a good split of people. So we have Main Street, we have Chamber of Commerce, neighborhood associations, sign company standards. It ranges from development and so forth. We wanted to make sure that we had a really diverse group that we were talking to this whole time, and that similarly our CAT team was also a very diverse group. So they met 4 times between September and December, once per month. And their task was to come up with a recommendation for sign code standards to give to the city.
Is that cut off at the bottom a little bit?
It is for you.
Okay.
You are missing our last member, which is Daryl Winan, which is representative of Business and Development. He's the head of the Realtors Association for Portland. Sorry about that. We had some screen issues earlier today. So about halfway through the CAT process, we had an open house. So we know that we went and talked to the community as much as we could. We got their input and their comments on our website, And we had this group that was tasked with putting together a recommendation. Were they on the right track or not? Are there big issues that we should get more direction from the public from? So we had an open house, and we asked 13 questions to the members of the public, and they were our harder issues that the CAT hadn't yet solved. So then anyone in the public voted by dot for what their answers were. For example, should we allow billboards? Yes, no. And they sort of voted by dot. A couple of pictures there. We had pretty good attendance, actually. So the CAT reached consensus or majority consensus, majority recommendation for many topics. There are a couple that they did not reach a consensus or a recommendation on. Only 3 specifically where they really split. I'm just showing you right now, but the purpose of tonight is just to talk about our process, and then we'll come back at another planning commission hearing and talk about the actual code itself. So the things that they didn't reach consensus on were if we should allow new billboards, where electronic message centers or those signs that kind of change, where they should be located, how often that message should change, and then also the number of temporary signs on private property. Right now, the CAT is reviewing a draft of their final report. It should be out shortly. City staff took their recommendations in their final report, and we're working on actual code and language, and that should also be out shortly. So through our process between July, when we really kicked it into high gear with our meetings, and now we've had a strong community engagement, we've created our CAT team, and now we're about to start a legislative approval process. So it'll go before the Planning Commission and the City Commission at a series of hearings, hopefully before adoption of our new sign code. We plan on sending out a Measure 56 notice on March 10th, which will include mailing over 10,500 postcards to all taxpayers within the urban growth boundary, so we go outside of the city. So all those areas within the urban growth boundary, but outside the city, we still include them as well. And again, then we'll have multiple Planning Commission work sessions. We're planning on at least one more work session before we go into hearings with you. And then when you're done reviewing it, we'll go to City Commission work sessions. We'll have 2 of those, and then a couple hearings as well. The next Planning Commission work session is scheduled for March 24th, and that's when we'll again talk about the proposed code, and then you'll get to see that final report from our community advisory team, or our CAT, as well. Are there any questions on the sign code process thus far? Yes.
You said you'll be sending out notices to the 10,000 some odd people.
Yep.
So that means they're going to get another one of those orange postcards, and everybody's going to be panicking about their property and
Yeah, we haven't picked the
Okay.
color, but exactly. Every time we do code changes, we pick a different color. But the orange one for South End, I think we've done green, but yes, exactly the same thing. This postcard will put the project website on it. We've learned that lesson.
yeah.
And then also all the information will be on our city website as well.
Okay.
And then we'll post all of the code language onto the project website, so you can go either place.
So what is the status of the sign code as of today? So the current sign code, people are still coming in and getting permits for signs, or
Yes.
they aren't, or they are?
I hope they are.
Yeah.
They're still required
Yeah,
for
okay,
sign
that's-
permits. Mm-hmm.
That's what I thought.
Mm-hmm.
But the enforcement is still on a, so if I see something, I would call in, and then that's how it would be dealt with?
Yeah, enforcement is a big issue that came up as a topic of concern. Right now, we are not actively enforcing the sign code unless there's some type of danger involved, if the sign is going to fall on the sidewalk or something like that, or if it's in the right-of-way or some type of evident danger, then we would enforce it. So a part of the plan will include a strong public educational piece for the new sign code, and then trying to figure out a way for some sustainable enforcement as well.
The other thing that I was going to ask about is that on the open houses that I attended, one of the things that people seem to be really agitated about is whether or not they would have to pay a fee. And while I want to say that I was completely taken aback by that, because I just assumed that if you're going to erect something on property, same as a building permit, it's the same type of permitting process. Did the committee have any, they didn't have any disagreement about that?
There's some of the recommendations that do relate to fees. So one of the major changes that are proposed are right now we don't allow any signs within the right-of-way. You'll see a lot of those A-frame sandwich boards downtown, for example.
Right.
So none of those are allowed right now. And the CAT recommended, and our staff is recommending as well, to allow signs within the right-of-way. The CAT also recommended a reduced fee for the signs in the right-of-way and maybe having a permitting process where you would apply once a year or something like that. City Commission is the only one that can dictate fees.
Right.
So we can move forward a recommendation for a reduced fee for, say, a sign permit in the right-of-way, but they would be the only ones that could give the approval or not.
Well, I'm assuming with Herb Works being a consultant, they have a one-year fee at the City of Portland, and they have requirements. I'm assuming they told you all this, that they're a certain size and where they can be. And so in terms of the right-of-way, are we only looking at right-of-way in downtown, or are they looking in other, I mean, it's natural to me that that allowing some sort of signage in the right-of-way downtown would be very appropriate. In other areas of the city, it's a little different because there's not a standard sidewalk width in some parts of town. So you might have a sign there and it would take up the whole sidewalk, which would be not good because it wouldn't meet ADA or pedestrian access and those sort of things.
The recommendation from our CAT team was to allow signs within the right-of-way, one per frontage, anywhere in the city. With that being said, there are still specific requirements that you have to meet, such as ADA and placement requirements. So if there's not enough space, then there's not enough space.
So anywhere in the city that's zoned for commercial use, or anywhere?
The CAT's recommendation was for anywhere. So for example, if you're in a residential neighborhood and you were selling your house or something, you could put like an A-frame for the open house in the right-of-way or something like that. Or one of those signs that say open
You mean the
house for
post?
sale this way or something. Again, we're content neutral,
Okay.
so we're not looking at what they're saying, but that would be
Well,
an
yeah,
application.
but most of the ones you see are on a post and then they have a thing sticking out. And
Or a little arrow that
She's
says.
talking about the ones that say open house this
oh,
way.
those
Directional
Oh, okay.
sign.
Oh, yeah. Well, those seem to come and they're not there permanently. They come and they go. Was there any thought given to the historic districts? Because we had a separate sign. We currently have separate signing for those districts, and I know that in our design guidelines for both of the districts, we have signing requirements. Did they talk about that?
So, yes, it was a consideration that the CAT looked at. It was for historic districts. We also met with the Historic Review Board, and we're meeting with them again tomorrow. We are leaving all of those requirements, which are in the HRB documents, as they are untouched. Our sign code itself doesn't talk about historic districts. It has the same standards, but obviously the Historic Review Board rules on top of that apply. So it would be a similar type situation. One thing that the CAT did recommend or talk about was allowing banners for a temporary amount of time, but not allowing banners in a historic district. So that would have been the only new layer.
Okay, well, I know just one final question on that. In the McLaughlin Conservation District, there was a requirement that your sign be made primarily of natural materials and be externally lit, not the plastic signs. And we have a number of those that in the last 10 years have just suddenly appeared. And they are not in compliance with the code that we have now. And it would be really nice if we could figure out a nice way for them to go away.
So once this process goes through, there will be some language on non-conforming signs, but they would have had to have been, or how the code is shaping up is if they would have to have been legal
At the time.
at the time they were constructed.
Okay.
That was actually the question I was going to ask, is this code going to be retroactive and applied to existing signs that are non-conforming?
So at this point, there was no recommendation from the CAT to go back and make previous signs if they were allowed legally to be removed, if they're not allowed today. The recommendation was if they were constructed legally and we changed the code so they're no longer legal, that they could stay until the owner removes it.
So if they were legal when they were installed, but if they were not legal when they were installed, then they could be required to be modified or removed.
Then you would go through code enforcement.
Give you an example. I'll say it, the gigantic sign at the Oregon City Shopping Center was legal when it was put up back in the day in the 70s. It is, according to our code, would not be legal now. As long as they just change the faces, they're okay. But if for some reason that sign blew down, or I don't know, they probably couldn't, unless it was some act of God. I think act of God provision is still in there. But they came before us to have additional signing, and there was a big discussion about their existing sign. We don't allow them that big anymore, but that was then.
I just have one question about the Urban Renewal Agency and if there's facade grants and that sort of thing, and if you guys have considered coupling the sign code process to issuing facade grants, and people, when they come in for any kind of building refurbishment, that they kind of tie the sign permit process together so that when they design their facade and they create, a new building frontage, that the sign ties in nicely with that whole thing. Very oftentimes in jurisdictions, they'll get their facade grant, do their facade, and then come in later and get their sign that doesn't really fit very well, thinking that they might be able to do that because they got their facade grant or something. So, something to think about, I guess.
I think they're doing that.
Are they?
And
Are they coupling? Do they couple
in the
the
downtown,
process
when they get a
together with it?
facade grant down on Main Street, any place else I don't know about. Well, I can't wait for the fun.
You can have all the regulations in the world, but it's going to take some staff time to enforce it, administer it. And are they two separate jurisdictions, code enforcement and sign permit issuance? Are they separate?
So when I come back on March 24th, we'll talk about enforcement in a lot more detail, but we want to make sure that we have a sustainable enforcement of our sign code and that we don't come back to the place where we're at today, where we're not really enforcing a majority of it. So we're sort of figuring out the fine-tuning parts of that right now. As far as who does the enforcement, you're talking about if it goes to planning department or code enforcement and how it gets enforced, and if we commit some certain number of hours per month or whatever that breakdown is. We're working out the details right now, but I'll have it for you on March 24th.
Have any consideration been given to the effects it's going to have on the budget, personnel-wise?
I have a feeling Tony's going to look at that.
He's
So, yes,
chewing his
it is.
fingernails, so yeah, he's looking at it.
Is he
Yeah,
smiling?
He is now.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it is.
obviously there are budgetary impacts. You have a code enforcement department that's not fully funded. Whose responsibility should that be, and how do you do that? And really that's a policy decision of the city commission as the taxing authority and setting their goals.
I can't wait.
Yeah. More to come.
I can.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Didn't we have a bigger screen last week?
Something happened with this.
It got wet and shrunk.
Yeah, it shrunk.
I kept looking. I thought, okay, I'm totally crazy. I thought the screen was like a lot bigger last 2 weeks ago.
So that concludes our work session. The public hearing for the next is scheduled to start at 7 o'clock. So if we want to take 5 minutes and then come back and we'll start the public hearing at 7 o'clock as advertised on the agenda.
Sounds good.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.